So welcome back to another episode on the RX-7, and I know you guys have been wondering what is going on. You know, I've had a lot of messages and you guys have been asking what's going on with the RX-7, where's the FD, and even when I bought my Cruiser, the Cruiser guys are like, don't worry about the 79, show us the FD. So yeah, it's been almost 3 months since we last disassembled the 13B. And I'm going to take this moment to blame Omar and COVID because Omar got COVID. But not really, just kidding. Pretty much just life got in the way. I got my Cruiser, went on holidays, and then we came back, had World Time Attack, and we were both involved in some way with that. And so finally, I'm stoked to be back down here at Raceonly so that we can assemble the 13B. Yeah, I just wanted to say a huge thanks, Omar, because you've been so helpful in this whole process, and also you've been giving us plenty of content, and also the viewers are loving it. So.
Yeah. Hopefully we can do some more today. So.
Yeah, definitely. Today, I guess the plan is to have a look at what we've done in terms of preparing the engine for this build, and then we're going to go ahead and assemble the engine.
I wanna be the best in the game, invest in my name, check no restraints, I'm obsessed with the pain, I ingest, I retain, assess and I change, possessed by the thought I'll be free one day from society's restraints, money, clout and fame, a disease of play, we all love to hate, have to play the game, have to make a name, all our insecurities are this is war with the enemy.
I guess we've done the doweling, we've done the porting, and also we've done the machining on the
rotors,
some parts of the motor.
Yep.
Let us know what kind of difference it makes to the motor.
Okay, so look, I'll start off with the easy stuff. So the most obvious one will be porting. So I'm just going to move this rotor housing, slide this over a little. One of the first mods we did with this was to, obviously you want to make the engine make more power. So, you know, we decided to go with the Bridgeport. I know you love the sound.
Brap.
Exactly. The first step we've taken the engine and we've ported the main port. So this is the main port. And this is actually, so this part here is actually the bridge.
Yes.
And that's the bridge port, if you like. And the reason it's called the bridge port is because there's a bridge left between the two ports. Okay. So fairly simply, this is what we do on most sort of aggressive road cars, track cars. We don't really deviate from this porting style too much. If it's a full-blown race car, we can be more aggressive with the bridge port. We tend to find with this sort of porting, we get a nice middle ground between some sort of drivability and still a good top-end charge.
Yeah, so what kind of problems, I guess, do you run into when you start porting it too much?
I guess a port done properly, theoretically, should be no less reliable than the factory engine. Okay? But if it's done wrong, I guess the areas that can go wrong, so if we cut the bridge too close to the water jacket, so that's where this petroleum jelly is, that's the water jacket. If we make that too thin, it's common for them to break and then leak water in the engine. If we overport this part of the port here, or this part of the port here, you can also get water in the engine as well. That's pretty much what could go wrong if you do decide to port the engine. But again, if you have the correct templates and you've got experience, then you'll get a good gauge for what material you have there and how much you can port. But realistically, if the port is done correctly, there should be no difference in reliability. I mean, at the end of the day, we haven't changed anything here or made anything weaker here for it to have to fail. Even when we do our bridge ports, we don't make the bridge itself very thin. Okay, so what you tend to see with really aggressive non-turbo bridge ports is they'll make this cut at an angle, and they'll cut it at an angle on the inside as well, and it'll be really thin. So if there's any excessive pressure there at all, this will break.
Yeah.
Okay, but with a turbo engine, we don't chase that at all. We're not angle cutting the bridges or anything like that. We prefer to have the strength in this area.
Awesome.
So as far as porting is concerned, it really is as simple as that. There is one other thing that we do, and I'm just going to sneak this away, and I'll grab a rotor housing. Okay, so when we do a bridge port on the iron, if you don't remove any material here, then this will essentially cover probably half of the bridge port. Okay, so you'll see there's a rotor housing surface here, and then there's a little divot cut into the side. So we cut this so that when the housing lays on top of the iron, that part of the bridge port is left open, and there's an area for the air to enter.
Almost looks like a little chip off the block.
It does. It does, and it kind of looks odd. You would think that it would affect the way the engine runs, but because there's no compression area here, it doesn't affect the way the engine runs. While I've got this in my hand, we've also done some exhaust porting as well. Now, with this particular engine, I would never usually do an exhaust port like this, but because we've got one housing from a previous engine build, that we're matching to another one, I've obviously got to match to what's already there. There's nothing wrong with this exhaust port other than it's very aggressive. Okay. It has a very early opening time and a very late closing time. Okay. So exhaust port like this will have a lot of overlap. Again, we are Bridgeporting the engine, so overlap is going to be there either way, but it is a very aggressive exhaust port. Okay. Again, like I would say if there was a negative to that, it'd just be drivability. Okay. The next part of the, I guess, engine machining process, if you like, is doweling. So I'm going to grab these. So these are engine dowels. Now, Mazda use 2 of these to lock in a rotor housing to a plate. So what I'll do is I'll actually show you guys what that looks like. So I'm going to butt these up together. We're going to slide this in hopefully. Okay, so I'm going to make sure this lines up. Cool. Okay, so that's one dowel in. And then we're going to put the bottom one in as well. Okay.
And they're the factory ones.
These are the factory ones, yes. Yep. So we've got 2 dowels in. So the whole idea here is we want to add more of these. Now, why do we want to add more of these? So what we tend to find is the iron likes to crack around this area here, because if you look at it, all the weight, so all the rotational weight, if you like, is all applied to these corners, and probably specifically more this corner than that one, because this is where all the combustion happens. So, I mean, like I said, there's a few ways to do this. We like to do this method because Mazda obviously saw it fit to do it this way. We've just basically taken the same method and added more. So basically all we're doing is taking another engine dowel and sliding it in. Okay? So now we have one locking point, another locking point, and we've basically added 4 additional locking points.
I see.
Okay? So I guess the aim of the game is to try and take as much weight off these 2 dowels and share it across 4 other dowels. Yes. If we can take off even 50% of the pressure on that dowel, then that would increase the amount of power we could make on an engine without having to risk cracking that area. Now, putting dowels doesn't make an engine unbreakable. Usually when you dowel an engine, you simply find the next weakest point. So what we tend to find is once you've got an engine doweled well, and the dowels actually work the way they're supposed to, you tend to crack the engine from the middle. Sure. Okay, and it makes sense because that's where the crank runs, that's where the gears are, so that's your next opposing link. Correct. Yeah. Okay, and it always tends to be the front iron. Okay. But again, you know, we're not, like for this particular build and most builds, anything under 800 horsepower, we can achieve that with a cast motor. Once you go above that level, then you can always go to a billet plate and cross that road. The next part to building a relatively high horsepower rotary engine is the rotors. We do 3 large modifications to them. So the first one, and the most obvious one usually for most, is the side clearancing. We do a cut across the side of the rotor, and it's done on both sides. And what we're essentially trying to achieve with that is we're trying to make the rotor a little thinner. And the idea is that at really high RPM, what we tend to kind of observe is we tend to see the tips of the rotors contacting with the plate. Now, there's plenty of theories as to why that happens. I probably won't go into it because I'm sure someone will disagree with me, but Mazda actually made a change to their rotor machining process so that if you bought a rotor from Mazda now, it would actually be different to what you would have got in the original engines, and they actually added more clearance, so they actually did the same machining process as well. We take that and go a little bit further, if I have to be honest, because if we're going to build an engine, we really only want to do it once, and if a rotor makes contact with the plate, it's usually catastrophic, right? So we try and steer clear of that. So the next part we also do is we also machine the faces of the rotors. You can see a sort of OEM part there, down there, and then a machine part in the middle. So the reason we don't machine the whole face, especially on FD rotors, is they're quite thin in these areas, so we don't want to weaken them anymore. Any material removed across this area would mean that they're more likely to bend in this area, okay? Now, also to add to that, when we look at an engine that's stripped down, that's made a lot of power, they tend to only make contact in the center over here. So these are the areas that we target when we machine. Now, something also to point out, because I guess I'll put 2 rotors side by side because it'll be more obvious. But if you look at 2 rotors side by side, it looks like we machined more on this rotor than we did on this one. That actually isn't the case. It's the same program, but the actual external dimensions of the rotors are not all the same. Okay, so you get some variances when you machine them. It's quite common. So whenever we machine rotors, we always tend to find little differences like that. So the one last thing, and it's probably hard to see on camera, but I'll run you guys through it anyway, is engine balancing. So we've gone through and cut all this weight out of the rotors, and we haven't really verified that we've made sure the rotor's still in balance, and usually it's not. Okay, so we tend to kind of go that little bit further and make sure that each rotor is similar weight to the other. So if we measure these, obviously they've got seals in them now, but if we were to weigh them pre that, they would be 1 or 2 grams apart. Wow. Okay, so from factory we see as far as 50 grams.
50 grams?
50 grams,
on
yes.
A rotating mass.
I've never seen more than 50 grams on a factory engine. I have seen 80 to 100 grams on a couple of built engines, but that's another story altogether. Okay. But yeah, on factory rotors we tend to see, on average we see somewhere between 20 and 30 grams. Okay. But on a balanced assembly like this engine is, it's 1 to 2 grams.
That's good to know.
So that's pretty much the 3 main mods we do to the rotors.
Built to last with the webs I'm weaving. I could change the past with all I'm achieving. Got my foot on gas, never stop competing. If you break like glass, then this life's gonna eat 'em. Make mistakes real fast, then you learn how to beat 'em. If you take off the gas, you can see all the healing. If the pain...
So first step with this is obviously we got to put something to retain the water seals while we're assembling. Now some people use sealants and whatever they may not. I don't like using sealants in that area. I like to put the water seal down on its own. We just use petroleum jelly to keep the seal there. And obviously once the engine heats up, all that petroleum jelly will melt away and it'll just be the seal doing its job. Mazda designed the engine for the seal to work on its own. It doesn't require a sealant to work. The only parts of the engine we'll put sealant are these corners here, and that's just to seal the crankcase from the rest of the engine. The seal that Fred's putting down now is the inner water seal. And you'll probably pay note, if you look at the water seal up close, I'll actually point it out, there's a little kind of green section here. That section there is where the seal's joined. So Mazda obviously joined the seal together. So we put the joint at what we think is the coldest part of the engine, which is the intake port, because we feel like that would be the weakest link in that water seal. So that's the outer. So you got to be careful with the outer water seal. It's easy to stretch, and then it's really, really, really difficult to get in the slot if you stretch it. And you'll also notice it looks like a different seal to the inner, because it is. The inner water seal, which is the orange one, is actually a rubber O-ring and a gasket in one, whereas the outer seal is just a square O-ring. So Fred's just putting silicone down on the feet. That's, again, just to seal the crankcase. Not a lot of sealant is required. I feel like in these areas, less is more. Front rotor housing. The front and rear housings are different because they have chamfers on them. So they're the cuts that we did in the side for the Bridgeport. So you need to make sure that they're not different in any way. If you get them the wrong way, then the Bridgeports will essentially be blocked. So you need to make sure that the rotor housing goes down. And on the rotor housing itself, you've got O-rings on the top corner. So basically, because we have oil running through this dowel here, if you don't put an O-ring in that area, you'll get an oil leak. So the rotor housings have that O-ring on there. Okay, easy. So yeah, just I guess lubricate all your running surfaces. You obviously need to lubricate that front bearing as well. So we'll be putting a crank in that shortly. All right, I'm in. You need the exhaust port? Nope. No, cool. It must be on the gear, yeah. All right, you need the exhaust port. All 3 seals down. Okay, the apex seals down, done. Okay, so as you can see, I prefer that step over assembling an empty rotor with no seals. Everything goes in as you assembled it. There is little to no movement. It's just a sure way to make sure that everything goes where you thought it's supposed to go. So crank in. Cool. So this part should never really be difficult to do. If this part's difficult to do, then you have an issue with either your bearing or crank. We do a linish on the crank just to take off any sort of high marks, but the crank look good. They always have a small amount of run out, but this is still within specifications. So,
do you ever crack cranks?
I've personally never cracked a crank, but in saying that, I know in the drag world, especially with manual cars, they usually break the cranks because they're fighting a massive tyre. When you've got like a 33-inch tyre, if the tyre is shaking on takeoff, you have to think about it. That whole car is solid mounted, so it's basically eccentric shaft versus tyre, and you know, leverage always wins. It's off camera, but Fred's putting water seals in the center iron because obviously the water seals don't live in the rotor housing; they all live in the irons. So we have to prep the plate first. Now this one's a little tricky as well. We got to make sure that the plate goes down and the seals don't fall out. Every now and then, if you don't prep it properly, you will have a water seal that likes to drop. There is ways to kind of identify it through the assembly, but again, the best way is once you finish the assembly is to do a test and make sure that there isn't water pissing out inside the engine, because the last thing you want to do is put it all in the car and find out it needs to come back out again. Horrible, horrible thing to happen. All right, that's good. All right, let me know if you need me to go any higher. Okay. You essentially just need to line up your dowel pins and you should be good. Okay, done. Okay, so as you can see, that's the little trick, if you like, to getting that center plate down. So now we slide our extra dowels in. The reason we don't put them in at the beginning is to try and make the assembly process as clean and simple as possible, because the more dowels you have, the harder it is to get them to all line up. As you can see, there's only very minimal resistance to those dowels going in. Like you get a little click as they go down. It shouldn't be difficult to assemble an engine, and none of the parts should be that tight. So it should all just slide together really nicely, which it does. So pretty much just repeat the same steps. So I got in the car with this Uber, and this guy literally broke every road rule. Look, I'll be honest with you, actually I was in a rush, so I didn't really mind. But man, he was insane. Like normally we get a mad bank up of cars at the roundabout to the M5. So he went round all of them, cut in at the roundabout, swear to God, sped up, and he was doing at least 140 down the M5. I was watching, I'm like, wow. I'm like, I'm gonna get there fast. I did give him a tip when I got off, because he got me there fast. Yeah, I did. It wasn't a Tarago, dude. I couldn't believe it. Okay, so this is our rear rotor housing. You've got O-rings on both sides. We've got sealant, water seals. We're good to go when you are. Okay, so nice and smooth, no resistance, and that's how it should be. All right. Okay. Yep. I'm in. Okay. Oh. Yeah. There you go. Perfect. Yeah.
Very snug.
Yeah. So snug, but not tight, and there's a difference. So there's a real fine line with that one. That's all right. Perfect. Awesome. So if you ever have a water seal fall out, you'll tend to find one of the bolts won't go in. That is your telltale. Again, I only know that from experience.
I was just going to ask you, how do you know that?
I didn't predict that would happen. I'd be lying if I said otherwise. But if you have a bolt that doesn't go in, it's because there's a rubber in the way. So if you ever have to force a bolt in, there's a reason to think about it. So if you hear a metal thunk, that's okay. If it feels springy,
Just keep pushing.
if it feels springy, time to stop, stick a torch down there. All of these have the OEM washer and rubber seal. So these stop any coolant coming out of the back of the engine as well. Some stud kits will have like a washer and an O-ring. Not the greatest of things, to be honest, and we tend to see them leak a lot at the back. I like the OEM washer. It just works really. It's one of those things. So we like to do it in stages. Because we've got studs in there as well, the order ends up being a little different, but we tend to torque the engine down in 3 stages. So the first stage we just did, and I wouldn't say it's a torque down, but it's more just to make sure the engine's gone together square. Then the second one is a low torque setting, again to make sure that everything is going down square, and then we'll do a final torque down. Mortman's just going to go around and basically mark as Fred does his first torque setting, just so that we have some sort of record or visual record to know that we haven't missed one. I've got the stand. Cool. So there's a few different methods to the torque down process. Everybody will have a method. Mazda have a method as well that you can use. But obviously, because it's not a factory engine, we don't necessarily use their method to do that. So I would say, I'm going to say this very carefully, but there's no wrong or right way to do this other than to make sure that it's a gradual process. Someone doing some wet weather skids by the sounds of things.
Norman. In his Integra.
He's driving my Honda.
Oh, is he?
I guess now that we've done the basic block assembly, so this is what a short Mazda block looks like. We basically want to rotate the engine, make sure there isn't any sort of issues turning the engine over, and we want to hear 6 clear pulses. Now, if you've got corner pieces glued, if you haven't already heard them break loose in the assembly, we want to hear them break loose now. Obviously, with this assembly, we heard all 6 break in the assembly, so that's totally fine. So basically, we should expect that we should get 6 nice clean pulses, obviously 3 per rotor. So Fud, if you want to take it away and let us have a listen. And that's our 6. So Fred gave us the 7th one for free. But yeah, so, and again, once again, very important that the crank floats. So we know that means the crank isn't unhappy sitting in the middle. It's sitting quite happy. All right, so now that we have the short block assembled, we've rotated it, we've got 6 beautiful pulses. So pretty much from this point onwards, there's a few more things we obviously have to do before the engine gets the A-OK to leave this room. So basically we'll do a compression test. Okay, so we don't expect to see massive numbers at this point because again, you still have glue on the corner piece so that not everything's spinning 100%, but we want to make sure we've got even pulses and there isn't anything wrong that we need to kind of dive back into. The next bit we also want to do is we want to do an end float check. So we usually assemble what we call the front stack and we make sure that the engine has the right amount of float. And then the last part is a coolant pressure test. So again, we spoke about, possible assembly issues, O-rings falling out, things like that. We want to make sure that we're not putting an engine in the car not knowing what's going to happen. So they're the 3 checks we will normally do. Once we succeed at all of those, the engine can leave.
That's awesome.
Alrighty, so I'm really excited that we're finally back together.
I know, who knows, one day this engine might see some things. Yeah. Guys, I just wanted to wrap the video off. These guys have been a huge help. Omar, of course, and Fred, my new friend. Yeah. And, this engine, I'm really excited for it because, maybe one day there's an opportunity for us to push this car into something a bit more competitive. And with the help of these guys, I'm sure at Raceonly, we're going to have a good time. So, everyone, huge thanks for them. Thanks Raceonly, and I'll see you guys in the next video.